All right, welcome back, guys. My next guest. This is fun. We're going to spend a little time here. She was called to come on down on The Price is Right. She didn't make it on stage, but she got to bid twice. Shout out to my friend Rachel Reynolds. She enjoys Comic Con. We're going to dive deep into this. Her and her three siblings have all been hired as puppeteers. And I kid you not, guys, this is where we're going to spend probably 10 minutes on fun facts here. She's won the award in the mashed potato sculpture at the Potato Days. My next guest, SVP of Strategy and Planning at MediaBridge, Jacey Berg. Good to see you.
Yeah, hi Ian. Glad to be here.
So most of our guests, they'll have like one like, whoa, that was a wild fun fact, but you just like every single bullet point. And you have even more after that. We just had to condense them down. But let's spend a little time. Let's talk about The Price is Right.
Yeah, I mean, I have grown up like so many people loving Prices Right. Watching it after breakfast with my parents and grandparents. So when I had an opportunity to go to LA, definitely had to get tickets to The Prices Right, and spent a lot of time in line. It's a full day, but I highly recommend it. It's so much fun. And yeah, I got called to come on down. And I will tell you though, I think I'm officially the lamest come on down ever
Oh,
because I was sitting next to the four contestants row. So I literally stood up and moved over one seat. I didn't even get the chance to
you should have made a
run down and
you
high
should have made a
five
lap.
everyone. But it was still an amazing experience.
Yeah, you should have made a lap around. Like, hold
Right.
on. That's super dramatic
Give
about
me
that.
5 minutes, guys. I got to do this.
Yeah, I have my moment. I think I told you my wife, when she was out in LA in college doing an internship, her best friend was like infatuated with the show as well. And they waited all day, and then, did the whole thing and never got called down. So you're probably better than probably 99% of the US population. So this is a fun party fact. Okay, so Comic Con. Tell me
Yes.
Tell me about Comic Con. Do you dress up, do the whole dive in? I know you said you do more than just Comic Con, but what's the
Yeah.
infatuation there?
I mean, I've always loved pop culture
Okay.
in general. I love movies and television and all of that. So going to these conventions is a lot of fun to hear behind the scenes facts and meet people who maybe like that obscure sci-fi show from the 90s that no one else you knew watched and just hang out and see previews and all of that. And I also have always loved Halloween.
Mm.
So the opportunity to dress up, I will always take that opportunity. So yes, I will make my costumes and go cosplay and walk around as Mrs. Incredible, or pick a character for the day. So
I love it.
I enjoy a little bit of make believe.
I love that. What's your favorite Halloween movie of all time?
Um, if you're talking specifically movies about and take place on Halloween, I like Trick or Treat
Mm, okay.
is good, which is sort of a anthology that comes together in the end. If we're talking horror movies, I'm not even going to get into that because I don't even know how to pick my favorite.
Oh wow, that's yeah. See, I stay far away from it. I'm the complete opposite. Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas is like a staple in my home. So I love the whole family dressed up in Halloween as that for 1 year, and then
Oh,
also did yeah, and also did The Incredibles. So similar here. We're big into Halloween, especially having four kids. It's like the characters you can kind of like really dive deep
yeah.
into it. So you met our producer, Faith Nettles, recently at a Media
Yes.
Post event, which we love Seth and team at Media Post, and specifically you were there for pharmaceuticals, and we'll dive deeper into that. But let's start early because when we prepped for this, the conversation was you and I were kind of on similar paths as far as how technology impacted us and how people around didn't necessarily adopt to it. But I
Right.
think it was a college professor told you that basically the internet was a fad. So
Yeah.
let's dive deep into that.
Yeah, I graduated college with an advertising degree in 2008, and in a class we were doing theoretical media plans. And I remember looking at the list, and there were so many questions about radio and TV day parting and what kind of magazines to be in for this pretend client. But digital was literally a line item that just said, invest $50,000 and leave it at that. And I was on the NSAC team at the time, which our client was AOL Instant Messenger, if that'll take you back.
Yeah.
And so that, of course, was very digitally focused. So I had a question about why we weren't going more in depth in digital for this exercise. And his quote was, I think advertising on the internet is just a fad. So we don't need to worry too much about it. You're going to spend most of your time on things like TV and radio. And then my first job out of college was at a digital only ad agency working on media, doing search and banner ads. So I spent absolutely no time, at least at the start of my career, on TV and radio.
Shout out to that
So
professor. Did you shoot him an email like your first day with your with your buying plan?
it was tempting.
I love that. So it's interesting, right? Because a lot of guests that we recently had Olivia Ostry on that actually started at Yahoo, then went on to become a part of Verizon. And she shared very similarly with your fake client in college, the innovation side of digital media. Like it was like very small. And then next thing you know, it was kind of the way. So
Right.
what was it about that kind of drew you, besides the professor maybe trying to prove him wrong, but what really drove you towards digital media? Was it something intriguing? Because a lot of our guests, we talk about it, and including myself, it was so difficult because it was so new. So not only are you learning this ever evolving media, but on top of it, you're having to educate brands and clients on a media that more or less didn't exist in some cases 6 months, 6 hours ago.
Yes. Uh, I'll go back being on the National Student Advertising Competition in college and having AOL Instant Messenger as a client. It meant we were doing a lot more exploration in the digital spaces. And so I think part of the reason I was drawn and even considered for the job was I had a little bit of digital practical experience that wasn't common in people graduating from college at the time. And yeah, I liked the idea of jumping in on something where I had to figure it out, going in and learning the difference in double click and what's a floodlight, what's a spotlight tag, how do you handle the specs, how do you track things, being able to do all the reporting. And so I liked being on what I felt was the the cutting edge of the future and not just a fad.
Yeah. And you then later moved to a smaller but more holistic agency. What was the benefit there of knowing digital and being kind of your main focus and then shifting over to a traditional agency that also handled digital? Do you feel like that gave you a significant advantage, or had time already passed further along where everyone was kind of dabbling at it?
I mean, I think it did. Having a few years, digital um, has so many levers beyond what, especially at the time, were available in traditional. Understanding the targeting nuances, understanding how to traffic and tag and track was a really big piece of it. Just and the reporting side of things, were just elements that were not nearly as complex in traditional back in 2012 when I sort of made the move. But I did want to expand my capabilities and learn more about holistic media planning. How do I bring, you know, TV and at the time it was mostly YouTube as a video, most of the streamers and CTV was not really expanding at the time, but how do I bring that together? How do I start to do some of the streaming audio with Pandora in addition to a radio buy? How do I connect what I'm doing from a print perspective to what I'm doing with a native content perspective? And so I wanted to think holistically and be able to have my clients optimize across multiple channels rather than just thinking of digital in a vacuum.
Yeah. And those early days had to have been tough, especially with, what we talk about all the time. It's like the consumer journey. Where does the consumer interact with their mobile device, with streaming, but still traditional playing a major role in that?
Yeah.
And you worked on some fairly major accounts, including Walmart. What was that like, trying to kind of marry everything in together, or was it kind of piecing it together still at that time?
I mean, it led to some really cool opportunities, I think. With a lot of clients, especially back in the day, the reason they had a digital agency and a traditional agency was because of the expertise. Oftentimes, digital media was coming from agencies that were doing things like building websites who were trying to expand their capabilities, less so than some of the traditional buying shops trying to expand their capabilities because there was more overlap with things like web development and SEO. But from a client's perspective, if you have a traditional agency and a digital agency and you decide this is how much I'm giving traditional, this is how much I'm giving digital, what's that saying? Like to a hammer, every problem is a nail.
Yeah.
Well, if you're looking at optimizing as the digital agency, your solutions are naturally going to primarily be digital
Yeah.
and vice versa. And so I think being able to work on some of these bigger accounts where they were thinking holistically and sort of giving you an all-in budget and what did the mix make sense and being able to optimize and say, actually, because this campaign is younger, we're going to move out of TV and more into streaming, or because of the day parts of this, maybe radio makes more sense. Those are the kind of things that, really you want to be thinking of as a media planner.
Yeah. And it's unfortunately still today, there's a
Yeah.
lot of brands, right, that are just stuck in this like, well, I have my digital agency here, but it's, we as consumers, the way we engage in media isn't the way that necessarily media buying is two separate arms per se. And you agree, like it kind of becomes disjointed. And I say this all the time, the smaller, more nimble, holistic agencies, those are the ones that win in today's world because we as consumers, we are online and offline. 128-year-old out of home company plays a massive role into digital. It's why we got into programmatic years ago. It's because it's holistically, it can play an imperative role. But yeah, that disjointedness, you can see it, don't you feel like, even from a creative?
Yeah, and consumers don't think, oh, look at me, I'm watching linear TV, or look at me, I'm streaming on my mobile device. They're just watching TV.
Right.
It might be on Paramount Plus, it might be on ABC, but technically streaming. It doesn't really matter to them. They're just watching television and they just know who they, pay every month for the bills. So I think that we have to, as an industry, sort of get past the differentiation based on how you buy, which is not really the indicator. We need to follow the customer journey and not worry so much about like, well, I'm buying this through a programmatic platform and I'm buying this through a direct buy with CBS.
Right.
Therefore, we need to treat them differently. No, because the consumer doesn't treat them differently.
Right. Yeah. I always say this to a lot of guests when we go down this rabbit hole. It's like, and you probably feel the same, like, don't you wish you just didn't know how media plans were put together and you didn't know what a media was? And it's just kind of like you're driving around and you're like, oh, look, Disney Plus Zootopia on a billboard. And then you get it on your TikTok account. And then from an influencer, it's encouraging you. It's kind of like, because we as consumers, all you see is Zootopia. I need to download the Disney Plus app or get a subscription. And it's sometimes I wish I lived in that world where it was just so peaceful. And it's like, I wonder how that ad played out. So yeah, it's very
Right.
interesting. So let's dive deep into this because in a very, I don't like to use the word disjointed because I feel like now with different platforms and with programmatic and agencies like yourself that you work with, it's easier to buy all media across one
Yeah.
platform per se, but let's talk about like short-term versus long-term thinking. Like in the early days when you first started, and even your professor who were given way too much time for it, but anyone, it was very simplistic, right? It was like buy newspaper, TV, and radio, and you bought it at the right times, and you were brand building. I think we were talking about it. Soap operas came about because in the early days they were promoting soap and detergent and other products. And touch on that, because if it's too digital, then it becomes performance based only, and it becomes very difficult to find target audiences and build that brand over time, as opposed to like click and purchase. But you had a great thought when we were prepping on this. I'd love to kind of dive deeper into that, like the tension between the two. And they both play pivotal roles, right?
For sure. Yeah, I would never recommend anyone set aside long-term thinking in favor of short-term, nor vice versa. But even though I started my career in digital and still very much see it as, a massive opportunity for everybody, I do think it ruined our ability a little bit to look away from short term thinking. Early on, when click through rates were 40%, and there were very few websites, and the path to purchase was not very complicated, oftentimes you couldn't buy a product at you could either, you couldn't buy it online even. And, but you got to send a report to a client that said, like, here's the click through rate of my banner ad, here's the click through rate. And it gave them some indicator of how things are performing on a weekly, daily, monthly basis. And it made it, oh, cool, we can make decisions now faster that'll make us smarter about our campaigns. And that's all great. But as we've evolved, the customer journey has gotten significantly more complex. The desire for results quicker than ever is, still massive. And I think it's playing into the fact that there once upon a time were metrics that you could deliver really, really fast and people appreciated it. But it doesn't take into account things like time to purchase and the fact that if no one knows who you are, trying to optimize a search campaign so that you can get the lowest cost per click, you're going to hit a ceiling very quickly on people who are searching for you. And so you still need to respect long-term brand building and understand that it might take some time to really get metrics that matter for your business results. And if you're focusing on vanity metrics like click-through rate as the indicator of performance, you're going to optimize yourself out of anything that's going to potentially give you long-term incremental return. And so I think it's really important as brand marketers, as agencies, that we try to get ahead of that and give plans to our clients, to our leadership, that show things like reverse case studies. Here's what happens when brands don't invest in these things and how they, burn out quickly because, we can talk all day about whether or not the funnel or the flywheel or the messy middle are the way we're going to look at this. But if you're not bringing in new and growth customers, and if you're not understanding that that's going to be near term more expensive and less performative than going after just the bottom of the funnel, then you're going to max out early and you're not going to see that growth.
I think you were telling a story, and you don't obviously have to say the brand.
Yeah, it's okay.
I loved how you were telling when we were prepping about there was a brand that came to you with these like unrealistic audience numbers that they wanted to hit, and you guys were, so maybe tell that story, because there is such pressure to perform.
It was a client who came to us with our new annual goals. It was before my time at MediaBridge. This was several years ago. And we looked at them and sort of said, this isn't possible. Like, even if you had the budget to reach this, like, we can actually size these audiences and look at where you're at and what your growth trajectory is. And it's not possible to convert this many people. Mm-hmm. And they basically said, well, this is the number we need to hit to keep operating. Mm-hmm. as a business. And sort of like, well, you're gonna have some problems. Because again, this wasn't just, oh, you don't have the right budget or this is going to be hard. It's not possible. Well, they moved to a different agency because they need an agency who can hit their goals rather than have the real conversation with their leadership about what this means for the business and things like that. And I will say they are no longer in business, and they were a pretty well established brand at the time. And so, if we want to be partners with our clients, sometimes we do have to have hard conversations about performance. But I think the most important thing is we have to do the work up front
Yep.
to project performance. We have to show a plan. We have to talk about timing. When can we expect results from this test? When can we expect to hit certain milestones so that they have a narrative they can bring to their leadership rather than mid-campaign just being like, well, we don't know where we're supposed to be at. I think the time it takes to share data, understand really what matters to them, and put together a reporting plan is super important. Otherwise, you do get caught in your first monthly review being asked, to move money around because of a vanity metric like CPM that matters from a campaign health perspective, but it isn't necessarily indicative of the effect on your business metrics.
Yeah, and I think I was reading an article this morning, and it talked about that, like the pressures of like a CFO being so much more involved as the early days. The CMO was making all the decisions, and now because there's such and look, it's pivotal and it's important to have real time data and metrics, but also I would argue that oftentimes these brands that aren't established brands yet, or even if they are, if they're not careful, there's so many challenger brands that are coming up, every single day that, you can click and make that purchase and you're like, yes, we're hitting our metrics. But then that retention rate, oftentimes, because you're not telling a story, there's not this like authentic side of like, oh, I know this brand because, and the brand itself doesn't have to be around for 50, 100 plus years. And you have to have this elaborate story. But in today's age, like you need to, within a very short period, have some sort of story in a brand building moment that after you see that Instagram ad, and I'm the worst at this, like I will buy an ad on Instagram and I will buy in, but I have such a difficult time. I won't share the toothbrush brand, but I was like blown away by their stories, sustainability, the whole story, the woman that created the toothbrush. I hope she doesn't listen to the podcast. She'll know exactly who this is. And I purchased the toothbrush and I have no idea what this toothbrush is because I don't see any brands. And then next thing you know, I'll see an ad pop up and I'm just like, oh, there it is again. But if I wasn't served that ad, there was no story told in between. I almost felt like I was cheated. And it was like, well, I want to share this story. I want to share this toothbrush with others, but I purchased it digitally. And now I have no idea where it is. Oh, there's the Instagram ad again, 6 months later. And it's like, I would love some like storytelling, some other mixed media, out of home. Maybe there's a native advertising that's built into it, but touch on that a bit, like the pitfalls of being so just click focus, so like point to purchase focus and not having that middle story in between.
Well, and that's something where you sort of hit the nail on the head. You bought the product, but you couldn't, tell anyone anything about it. So they got the immediate sale, and that might be what they need during a growth phase, is to get as many immediate sales as possible and eventually grow into it. That works for things, toothbrushes, sunglasses, shoes, things that are not, that are, relatively broad in terms of a customer perspective, and also something that isn't complicated for people to buy. But on the other hand, at my company, we do a lot in spaces like med tech. And you aren't going to get like medical device that requires multiple doctor's appointments. Maybe you need to try it like pharmaceuticals first before you're approved. It is a long, long purchase cycle. And if you're trying to focus exclusively on like a click-through rate from a social ad that doesn't tell the story, that doesn't make people remember you, then you're not building your audience with those impressions. So when it does come time where they may need to be thinking about alternatives for their healthcare, or where a physician is looking into new solutions, you won't necessarily be top of mind, because you're looking at people who are, maybe already talking to their doctor about you and looking for more information. It's not that you shouldn't capture them, but if you can't position yourself the way you would as a toothbrush retailer. But if you are the toothbrush, as you're growing and as you're getting these conversions early on and finding that people generally like your product, then I think it's important to also understand how your metrics need to evolve, because the early adopter CPA is going to be a lot more efficient than new growth audience CPA, than expanding into new territories CPA. And if you want that incrementality, you're going to have to be comfortable with evolving your metrics, because if you keep trying to hit the same CPA over and over again, as things like AI change the game, as things like bringing in new audiences change the game, it's just a conversation you're going to have. And again, it's making sure you have a plan and are realistic about why this is happening, and then fulfilling on, hitting those goals.
Yeah. And it's, again, I think about the early days of cable TV, right? Like those audiences were very segmented based off of like Food Network. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
my product involves travel food and that universe, then I'm going to put my product there. But today, and I'd love to get your perspective on this, there's so many different audiences, and we'll stay with like healthcare med tech, which I know is a big part of your agency. There's different channels in how you target. There's a certain subset of audiences that you reach them only on TikTok or only on Facebook or only on Instagram. And maybe there's that gray area, but what are the challenges there? But also, what are the pros of having such a diversification of media platforms that, in our world, it's like, oh, social media. Well, let's dissect that down. It almost goes back to those days of like ESPN, Food Network, and the Travel Channel. And now you kind of have those segmented audiences. And does creative and storytelling play a different role in each, or how do you go about that approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best campaigns, and you'll hear it over and over again, respect the fact that creative and storytelling can happen on any channel. It doesn't matter if it's something like social, which has engagement and clicks and things. It it really is something where you want to make sure that you are thinking about the channel and putting together messaging that works. But that leads to the challenge of the realities of production and what that means. Once upon a time, you shot a TV spot and that was it. And now production budgets, or even if budgets are fine, production timelines are not there to necessarily benefit like assets that are tailored and thought up for every individual channel. I can say as a media, planner and buyer, it is not unusual to get, well, these are the three assets we have. You need to build a media plan around this. And okay, technically I have a 30-second spot, which I can run on YouTube or I can run on Facebook. It hits the specs, but it isn't necessarily what's actually going to drive performance on those channels. And so I think that's a challenge is aligning with creatives and production to really continue to think about tailoring assets. I think AI will open up opportunities to help make some of that process efficient, but we shouldn't be using AI to replace the strategy and the thinking around the creative, but it could help, with things like, making things more spec friendly or, versioning something. And so I think that that's a great opportunity there. And then you talked about things like Food Network. I think that these niche areas just open up more opportunities to get more specialized with your audience. It's not just, oh, they must like food. It's, oh, they specifically like Mediterranean food or something. And it isn't as cost prohibitive to get in there as maybe buying a package on the Food Network was once upon a time.
Yeah.
You can still get out there. You can find, you don't have to necessarily promote yourself with Guy Fieri. You can promote yourself with a up and coming food influencer. So it creates those opportunities. But of course, huge challenge is the fact that a lot of these are still walled gardens.
Yep.
Looking at real-time cross-platform reach frequency, while more solutions come out frequently, getting a good look at attribution, incrementality, what the right media mix is, because a lot of things are walled garden and there's limited visibility, it means there's a lot of like directional thinking, and we're all doing the best we can to stitch it together. And again, new solutions are coming out all the time to make it more more visibility into those spaces, but it's still a limitation that we all have to think about and look for solutions to.
Yeah, and I can imagine the brands that you represent at the agency level, they're like, I don't care, figure it out, right? It's well,
Well, yeah, of course.
we're buying Amazon and we're buying, YouTube, and it's kind of like, well, these all seamlessly flow together, and it's like, no, they don't. But let me try to figure out how to stitch these through. Makes things a little bit more difficult, I would imagine. So kind of you guys are constantly having this balancing act between the two.
Yeah, and with all of these, the rules are consistently changing, and oftentimes for good reason. Privacy concerns or data availability, or if we go back a few years to when the Cambridge Analytica thing, which again, a large issue with discriminatory practices. Those are all good reasons for these platforms to change their policies and affect advertisers, but it also means we have to be really nimble in adjusting how we're working with these brands and adjusting expectations around measurement or targeting capabilities. I've worked on real estate clients in the past, and when Fair Housing Act means you can't target based on household income, makes sense from a consumer rights perspective, but for a client who's like, I'm selling $1 million plus homes,
Right.
why should I be targeting people who
Interesting.
realistically won't be able to afford these homes? It can create some kind of interesting conversations around, how do we balance what's right for the brand versus what, legally we need to
Yeah.
do.
Well, and there's probably that even bigger challenge with the pharma brands that you and the agency represent as well. Like there is even bigger HIPAA
Yeah,
laws.
yeah, doing a lot in the med tech space, you know, constant changes and regulatory changes. So you got to keep your finger on the pulse. And again, it means having a strong measurement plan is really important. Making sure that you're working with solutions like Fresh Paint or Ours Privacy, so that you're able to have measurement solutions that are still HIPAA compliant, and making sure that your messaging is compliant, but still it's hard to balance the storytelling with also needing to fit a certain amount of time in for things like side effects and all of that.
Do you ever have friends that are like, oh, it's kind of like what you do is like Mad Men? And you're like,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But then also you're like, the regulations and all of the things that you're constantly have to evolve and learn, like it's so different, right? What
Yeah.
does that excite you? Because, looking at your storybook career, like you've literally represented so many different variations of brands. I love the acronyms that I've had to learn over the last 3 years with pharmaceutical, med tech, because those are constantly evolving. But what what about that does it really excite you? Where I kind of feel like you go back to this moment in like day one, you're like, I'm going to go digital just because you like to roll up your sleeves and kind of geek out about it.
Yeah.
Is that like the desire?
I mean, don't get me wrong. Give me a good old QSR with no bonus restrictions, and I'll have a great time. But yeah, I think it is a lot of fun and interesting to understand just any space and what's going on there, not just the legal regulatory challenges that are part of it, which of course, in a lot of industries like financial and healthcare is a massive part of it, but also it's understanding the customers and the challenges they face. So I see those two things as one and the same. I'm a strategist and planner at heart. So, I when I worked on a gardening brand, suddenly I could tell you everything you needed to know about hydrangeas. When I'm talking about our client Astron Biosciences and about their new product, I can tell you all of a sudden all about things like sensitivity and specificity in mammograms, which I couldn't talk about 2 years ago. So I see that these regulatory types of things as just part of that understanding of a new customer, a new industry, a new product.
I love that. And I've been at this for 20 years, and I've interacted with probably almost every ad agency in the US over the years. And I would argue that oftentimes it's just kind of like, all right, well, who's the best negotiators? And you give a major brand and 20, $40 million. I argue that that's super easy. But someone like you that kind of geeks out about this, it's fun, right? Because I feel like you kind of are like, all right, this is the new brand that I'm going to strategize for. And you just dive full in and start learning. It's almost like you
Yeah.
could have been a lawyer, but you pivoted towards like,
But I
oh,
didn't like
yeah,
money, I guess.
yeah, I
Or
guess you didn't like money. Yeah. Side note, kids, people in the ad industry, we don't make the money that you think we do, but it's rewarding and fulfilling. So the last back half of the podcast here, you've been at this for quite a while, and you've held different roles, and you've kind of evolved with media, which I always admire. I'm old enough to be able to say, like, these young kids have no idea how difficult it was. I'll give the perfect example with Out of Home. Now we're transacted through platforms and automation and programmatic, and you can buy in real time within seconds, have your billboard live. But there was a day right before I got here 20 years ago where they were still using fax machines, and they were putting little stars on maps, faxing it probably over to people like yourself. And you were like, all right, now I need to fly in, do a market ride, make sure that billboard actually looks and is physically there. But touch on that, like the evolution of media is one thing, and we kind of dove deep into that, but the evolution of like media planning and media strategy, how significantly has changed even in the last 3 to 5 years.
yeah, well, one, I think measurement, while it has gotten incredibly fragmented and there is no silver bullet, because if there was, nobody would have any jobs, but that has become a lot more accessible in ways that it didn't used to be. The early days of MMM solutions, for example, really only the Walmarts of the world could take advantage of those. And while it's still not accessible for everyone because of the reality of statistics and volume of data necessary for it to work, it is much more accessible for someone spending $5 million a year in paid media. Once upon a time, that wasn't a thing. Things like foot traffic solutions, I know Out of Home is doing a lot more with attribution that way. People are talking a lot about metrics like attention are getting out there with new solutions that way. And so that is one thing that's evolved, is you're getting more data on the back end for how something's performed that you then need to apply to planning. And if you don't have a clear measurement plan about what is telling you that is or isn't working, that can just cause analysis paralysis. You're asking yourself, with these mounds of data, what do I need to do? So you really want to plan ahead of time with your measurement solutions to know how you're going to apply them, or it's going to cause chaos in your planning
Yeah.
cycle. I think the other ways is just, I mean, we talked about the evolution, but the volume of needing to understand all these different channels. You talk about, the early days of planning. I was in digital. We didn't have the bandwidth for streaming. Meta, wasn't the company. It was Facebook at the time, but they did not have ads yet. You
Right.
know, so if you wanted to do something on Facebook, you just had to have your own organic page, which actually got real engagement.
Yeah.
That's no
Just
longer a
clicks.
thing.
Yeah.
And words like podcast, influencer, streaming, CTV, those just weren't even words at the time. And now it's part of everyday conversations that when you're coming in, you have to know all of these things so that they can be in your toolbox and your consideration set as a media planner, as opposed to those of us who started in the early 2000s. We got to add to our toolbox rather than
Right.
get it fully kitted out from the get-go. So it is getting much more complex from that perspective, but these tools are helping us to make a little bit more sense out of it.
Do you have like we're going to touch on the talent challenges at the agency level, but do you have like time that you spend every day where you're immerse yourself into like new media or the evolution of like a new product that maybe Snap's offering? How do you stay on top of it? How do your teams that work for you stay on top?
Yeah, I mean, I encourage everyone to find what works for them. I is there a podcast that you can listen to that keeps on top of certain things? If that's the medium that you like, go for it. E-newsletters are huge, especially for me. I have some of my favorites that I make sure to check every day and just see other headlines that are popping. If there's a new social network or something out there, I will join. I have accounts for things I don't even remember, like, when everyone thought that TikTok not was going to go away entirely, everyone was like, you got to go to Lemonade. So I have a Lemonade
Right.
account, and I'm like, I need to know what's happening. I do have a Snapchat, I have a Threads, I have an X. Am I active on them all? No, because I that would be my life, but I like to go on there and see what's happening. I also do very much encourage everyone to continue to meet with vendors in the marketplace. I know it can come off as very, very salesy oftentimes, but there are tools and solutions and vendors that I have that I worked with 5, 10 years ago who've completely evolved their capabilities. I can't just assume I know what they're doing because I worked with them once upon a time. And so, even if I don't think I have an immediate solution for them, I do try to make sure that I am, if not taking the meeting, going to events like the media post event that Faith and I met at, so that I can continue to hear what's happening in the marketplace. So I don't expect everyone on my team to do what I'm doing, but I do want to make sure that they are doing something that works for them.
Yeah, and it's so powerful. Like that's one of the biggest takeaways I think from the podcast here. It's just be a consultative seller on the vendor side. Don't go in and try to sell JC something. It's truly like, hey, let me tell you what has changed over the last year, 3, 5, 10 years. And I think so many people, that aren't like yourself, that are or like myself. I have anxiety, JC, every morning because I sign up for all these Substacks and all these e-readers and I'm like, I can't get to all of them. But what I've personally have done is I take 15 minutes first thing in the morning, and I'll find one specific one. I'll dive deep into a Substack or listen to a TED Talk, and it really has helped me. And I'm not even on the agency side, but it helps me better understand what other media is out there and how does out of home fit into it. And I always encourage the brands that I'm blessed to be able to meet at all these different conferences and even pitching to brands. I recall I was at Gooder, which I go to their big event every year. And shout out to Stephen Leese, my good buddy, who's the co-founder. And the whole purpose why he does them is for all the vendors to interact and figure out, hey, how do you guys collectively work together that can then make my brand story more authentic and holistic? Again, to your point earlier, it's just like, oh, it's a sunglass brand. But if you do it right and you have your vendors working with each other, then the plan is kind of built out and they have these
Yeah.
great exercises. And I've been a part of them with a few brands direct and a few agencies where they'll put everybody in the room and no salespeople allowed. And it's like, all right, you guys feed off of each other and figure out how each one of you can evolve as a medium and participate. Because to your earlier point, that's what consumers are. they're on
Right.
TikTok, they're on Threads, and next thing you know, they're watching, Paramount Plus on their phone, and then halfway through they'll switch over to TV. So how do you guys interact together? I think is key.
And I think that's something, I know you mentioned it earlier, what it would be like to not understand how advertising works and just operate as a consumer. And I constantly try to remind myself and my team and even my clients of that because they'll be, oh, could we like do something to make the consumers do this so
Mhm.
that measurement can be easier? It's like, well, I would love to say yes. The important part is we are not trying to force consumers to do a behavior that they're not going to do.
Yeah.
They might click on a streaming video ad, but odds are they won't because they're there for the content. It doesn't mean that the ad didn't work, but if we say that clicks on the video ad are the only thing that means it was a success, we're missing an opportunity and we're not listening to the customer behavior. So I think we have to remind ourselves, hey, you as the brand, when you aren't thinking about your brand and you're going out there, like, have you seen TV spots that resonated with you? Did you do an action because of a TV spot? And was it a click? If not, then you know that this works. And I know that we have to come up with a solution that shows correlation and causation, but the solution is not to, pretend customers aren't who they are.
Yeah. No, that's strong. So as we wrap here, I hate that I didn't get to meet you in person because Faith raved about you. But it's such a great takeaway, both from the vendor side that you guys, bring in and you buy, but also from the agency side. There's very few people that I've met like yourself that are truly immersing themselves and figuring out like what's next. Because at times it can be super air quote easy because it's like, oh, well, let me just buy across these channels and then I'm not going to get fired because I bought these channels and the metrics will perform and we're all good. But I love how thoughtful and authentic you are in your process, but also how important it is for, it's not about that first spike for the brand that the agency represent. It's about long term and how do I survive through with challengers coming in and then how do you reestablish yourself? So I love the methodology and how you and the agency that you work for are very thoughtful. Do you think that that's a significant advantage for, that mid-tier agency like yourself that can come in and just be holistically do everything compared to a lot of these massive holdcos?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a place for holdcos, and I don't think anyone will argue that. I came from an Omnicom agency in my past, and a lot of their benefits are around some of their tooling, the fact that they have these enterprise agreements with vendors, and so oftentimes pricing when you're buying in bulk like that is great, but it creates some limitations on some of the smaller brands where you aren't. And when I say small, I'm talking like 10 million or plus in annual spend. I'm not talking like you're small relative to their biggest accounts.
Yep.
And it means that a lot of these tools and solutions that they have just aren't really something you can unlock. And so you need something a little bit more personalized. And that's something I think that these mid-tier independent agencies can offer is some of that personalization, some of that lack of red tape that comes with independence, some of the nimbleness that comes with that. And so there's a place for both of us in this industry, and it's a big opportunity.
All right. So last topic, which is extremely powerful because you've talked about your journey and your career and all the insights and different media that you've learned, but agency and talent challenges, especially at the junior level. How difficult is that? And are there struggles elaborate on
Yeah,
that?
I think so. I hear more and more of people looking for talent that they would call batteries included,
Mm.
where you're ready to hit the ground running and immediately become highly billable and client facing and produce quality work, which sounds great. But what does that mean 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when we are haven't invested as much in junior talent? There used to be a more serious pathway of getting internships. You were expected to, learn on the job, shadow someone. No one was putting you in front of a client. And you were expected to make some mistakes. And the benefit was you could sort of earn your keep by doing some of the administrative type of work to take that off of people's plates. The problem is AI right now is being the solution for all that admin work. And, you know, I'm as happy as anyone about busy work going away, but it means that I think we need to take that time and be thoughtful about how to ensure that people are learning, because it is getting harder to be batteries included. We talked about how complex the space is, how many channels there are. Once upon a time, you pretty much had to learn TV, radio, and out of home, and you were good. And then, yeah, you had to add in maybe some paid search and some banners, and now we have to think about streaming video. And suddenly it's a 20 channel media plan that you need to know all the ins and outs. While I talked about the fact that we shouldn't dictate our channel plans by how we buy, we should dictate it by audience consumption. We still have to consider on the back end, the business side, on how we buy, because you need someone who can place the buy, traffic, do spec work, all of that. And so it's hard when clients are expecting you to be cheaper than ever, when they are expecting every person in the room to be a seasoned professional, and you're expecting you to be faster than ever, but you also want to make sure the industry has a future. You also want to make sure that you're not 70-year-old still having to do all the work, because not because you don't want to work, but because it's time for someone else to take on the reins and there's no one to do it. So it's just hard to watch an industry that I've very much enjoyed, those entry level opportunities disappearing, and junior talent being seen as failures because they are not operating as the same level as people with 20 years of experience. I had some great bosses and supervisors who understood that I needed extra time to do some things that my senior coworkers didn't need, or who knew I needed an extra set of eyes on my work to make sure it was good, or who knew that maybe they shouldn't put me in charge of a project. It's just harder to find those opportunities, and I feel for youth, and I hope we can figure out how to get them back in the swing of things.
Well, and it also helps not only the leadership understand, like, okay, JC, young JC, let's guide her this way. But then more
Yeah.
importantly, you, JC, as that young employee, just as your career has gone,
Yeah.
you start to navigate towards certain things that you really like, as
Right.
opposed to, hey, this is what this client buys. They buy TikTok all the time. And then next thing you're so jaded by TikTok, you have no idea what's happening over here on streaming and what's happening in out of home. And yeah, I agree. It's a bit of a challenge. What is your advice? Because we do have a lot of young people. It's why we do the consumer, or why we do our guest journey throughout. But what advice do you give, lasting advice you give to young people that are wanting to come into the ad agency space, minus the fact that they don't make a lot of money?
Right. I mean, yeah, it's hard because I think to the people in my age, where our parents and the older generation were saying things like, "Oh, you need to just bring your resume in person and shake the hand of the CEO in order to get a job." And it was like, "No, they will literally kick me out. The job hunt for junior level talent is just markedly different for when I was young versus when my parents were young. And now it's so markedly different
Mhm.
from where I'm at to where junior team members are at. It's not the same where you can just apply to jobs posted on LinkedIn and can expect a response.
Right.
People are getting ghosted all the time. And companies are getting hundreds of applications for one position, and generally it's filled by someone who knows someone.
Right.
And so I do feel for people. So I would say the main thing is relationships are everything in this business. So do what you can networking wise and do what you can sort of self education wise. Listen to podcasts about the industry, find free resources and social accounts and influencers who are talking about it so that you can work on education while you're working on finding an opportunity. Try to reach out to people in the industry on LinkedIn. Not everyone will welcome it, but there are so many people who do want to hear from you and want to help and want to try to be a mentor. You can't ever guarantee anything's going to come of it, but relationships are still the primary currency of this industry.
Yeah, I think AdFed, be a part of your local AdFed, be a part of that, and you would be blown away. I'll throw this out there. Hit me up on LinkedIn, and I will respond to you all day. I love nothing more. Coming from someone that started as an intern here at Lamar 21 years ago now, I started off as an intern. I had a full-time job working in minor league baseball, major league baseball, and I wanted to get in this side and literally just annoyed the CMO, was a part of AdFed, drove into classes, did everything. So hit me up on LinkedIn. I am all about doing some mentorships, internships. And I'm not saying this because I work for a billboard company, but JC, more and more we're seeing like people throw up and buy billboards like near these ad agencies and doing all these like clever ways. I even saw, we'll end with this. I saw one with, that was for coding for ChatGPT. And this guy bought a billboard because he wanted his company to be purchased, but then also wanted to be recognized as a leader in that AI universe, that he put this wild code up and he bought the billboard in San Francisco. And it was so narrow focused on 14 people, even though hundreds of thousands of people were driving past that billboard. Talk about a very niche audience. But I see more and more people putting up billboards for like as their resume. And it's kind of like, all right, well, they know that medium, or, maybe it's a TikTok reel or something wild like Gary Vee always talks about. But it's that, if you want to stand out in the space that you're trying to get a job in. And that is, I think, super clever. But yeah, you're spot on. Like network and relationship. Like you and I are friends now. And I think it's so cool that you learn and meet people. Like you're not going to hire someone that's just from like a piece of paper. Like that's boring. So
Right.
show up.
And it shows you understand the industry. If you can market yourself, you can market
Yeah.
a
Anything.
client.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I know that that sounds exhausting, and it is, but those are just some ways that are, you don't have to pay money to do a billboard. Not everyone can do that, but thinking of unique ways to kind of reach out and show up to the people in the industry can help you find some of those opportunities. And then just making sure you're educating yourself, because even once you get in the industry, you can't just sit back and wait. You have to be, everybody, me included, everybody at every level has to be very proactive on staying on top of what is a fast, rapid changing industry.
Yeah. Well, I love this so much. And I can't let you go without you wrapping this up with Potato Day Mashed Potato Sculpture Awards. Tell me about this. It's like, this is so amazing to me. Like
So,
I want to bring you to all my parties and just be like, let's make Jacey here.
my grandparents used to live in Barnesville, Minnesota. It's up by Fargo, and their annual festival every year was called Potato Days.
Mm.
And it is a festival celebrating the potato, as I'm sure you could imagine. Potato picking contests, free French fries everywhere, mashed potato wrestling.
Oh,
And one of the events was they would make these giant vats of mashed potatoes using instant mashed potato flakes.
okay.
And they had different age groups and entry categories, like any art contest. And so you'd go and you'd get a giant pile of mashed potatoes and you'd sculpt something. And I've a couple times in my youth, unfortunately, I haven't been back in quite some time, but there were a couple of times where I won my age division. One I was particularly proud of was a a squirrel holding a little acorn
Out of
and
potatoes.
out of mashed potatoes. So you would do
Wow.
things like add extra flour and things to make it a little bit more palatable, but there were limitations on how many decorations and how much you could add to it and so on. So, yeah, I that was something we did every summer was go up to Barnesville for potato days every year.
Wait, I just looked this up on the side. I'm literally going to watch this YouTube channel, the Valley News Live. I hope your face pops up here. This would be amazing.
Oh, that would be such an old
I love it.
news story if it was.
I love it. It
I
says
was
11
I
years
was
ago.
like 10 years old when I won that particular award. I know there's a photo somewhere at my parents' house, but
Amazing. Well, listen, this was extremely insightful for myself, and I know our listeners are going to really enjoy it. I think oftentimes people don't get to see the behind the scenes and what goes into the agency side. So I'm very grateful for you opening it up and sharing your expertise here. And was a treat for me for sure.
thank you so much. It was great to meet you as well.
All right. Thanks, JC.
All right, thanks.